In the first part of section 8, we're going to talk about something called a literal equation. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to solve equations for a given variable and then use formulas to solve real-world problems. So an equation that involves several variables is called a formula or a literal equation. So some that you guys are familiar with are like the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. This is a literal equation. And in this section, you'll be asked to solve an equation or formula for a specific variable. So I might give you this equation and say, solve for h, which means instead of this formula saying a equals 1/2 base times height, I want it to say h equals something, but have it mean exactly the same thing. So even though we will have no numbers here, like I'm not going to tell you what the area is and what the base is, and then you have to find the height, you still have to use our solving technique of SADMEP. So we'll undo subtraction and addition first, and then undo multiplication and division. Exponents we won't have much of, and then grouping symbols. So you'll end up getting something like this for your answer, which would give you the height if I told you the area and the base. So it's still kind of numberless and with lots of letters in there. You're just rearranging the equation using the same methods that we have before. So if I give you one like this and tell you to solve for m, that means our goal is to get m by itself. So remember SADMEG. Take a look at what's happening with it. It's being multiplied by 4, so that's right here, and a negative 3n is being subtracted from it. So because we're going this way, we got to undo that subtraction stuff first. So we're just going to move it over to the other side, and we get 4m is the same thing as 8 plus 3n. So now the only thing hanging out with m is that 4, and because they're multiplying, what I'm going to do is divide to get rid of it. Whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other. So I'll divide this side by 4 also. So this crosses off, and I'm left with m equals 8 plus 3n over 4. Now it's very tempting here to say, oh look, 8 divided by 4, I'm going to make that 2. But remember that there's imaginary parentheses right here. So if you want to, you could do 8 divided by 4 plus 3 divided by 4n. And then you could simplify this and tell me that it's 2 plus 3/4 n. But that seems like a lot of work when this is a perfectly acceptable answer. So make sure you don't just cross this off and tell me that it's 2 plus 3n, because the 3n also needs to be divided by 4. So let's try some more. I have to get n by itself in this one, so this guy right here. So remember, undo subtraction and addition first, and we have this addition, so I'm going to get rid of it with subtraction. So I have 15 minus 6p is the same thing as 3n. And then just like the last one, 3 and n are multiplying, so to get rid of it, I'm going to divide. Now you can leave it like this, but when I look at this, 3 goes into both of these numbers, so it makes sense to rewrite it like 15 divided by 3 minus 6p divided by 3, and you end up with 5 minus 2p. But this is also a perfectly acceptable answer. So now let's try one more. So we got to get k by itself. There's subtraction here and division here. But remember, there are giant parentheses here. So when we look at SADMEG, those parentheses are the very last thing we have to undo. So there's no subtraction or addition that's not inside a grouping symbol. So then I have to jump to multiplication and division. And since we're dividing by 5, I'm going to multiply both sides by 5. Crosses off, and I get the k minus 2. And then 5j, or 11j times 5 gives me 55j. And then these parentheses aren't really doing anything anymore, so we can go inside and get rid of this addition. So we end up with 55j plus 2. So let's try some harder ones. If you notice, for both of these, we're solving for something that we see twice in the equation. So for this one, we have to solve for d, and it's here and here. So what we want to do is get all the d's on one side and move everything else to the other side. It doesn't matter what side we move them to. So let's move them to the left. So that means I'm going to subtract 3d from both sides. So d, remember this is 1d, minus 3d will give me negative 2d plus 5c equals negative 1. And now I'm going to get rid of this 5c here following SADMAG. Remember, these are not like terms, so I can't combine them. And now this looks just like the problems that we had done before. So I want to undo multiplying by negative 2, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. So we end up with d equals negative 1 minus 5c divided by negative 2. In a textbook, you will probably see it written as 1 plus 5c divided by positive 2. And that's because everything's negative here. If I multiplied the top and bottom by negative 1, it would all turn positive. But if you give me this answer, that is totally okay as well. So let's try one more together. So I have q here and q here. So I got to combine them. This one's a little different than the one before, and we'll see why in a second. So when I try to combine these two things, they're not like terms. I cannot combine them because one has an r with it and one doesn't. So instead what I'm going to do is the same couple steps here. I'm going to get everything with a q on one side and everything without a q on the other. So that's how I'm going to move this 18 over. So then I have 6q minus qr equals t plus 18. And then, because both of these things have a q, what I'm going to do is undistribute the q. So think about a distribution problem. If I gave you something like this, where I give you a q on the outside, and then a 6 minus r on the inside, and I asked you to simplify it, what you would do is you'd multiply q times 6 to give you this, and q times negative r to give you that. So all I did was undistribute this. I pulled the q out, and then it still equals t plus 18. And now, to get q by itself, since it's being multiplied by this, all I'm going to do is divide both sides by all this stuff. And we ran out of room, so let's write it up here. So this all crosses off, and I'm left with q equals 6 plus 8, or sorry, t plus 18 on the top, divided by 6 minus r on the bottom. So let's say I gave you a problem like this. Using the formula for a rectangular prism, we need to solve the formula for w, and then actually find the width of something. So here's our formula. This formula says that volume equals length times width times height. So we're just going to multiply them all together. We need to solve the formula for w. That's our first step, which means get this by itself. So in order to do that, you take a look at what's going on with it, and it's being multiplied by L and H, or length and width. So in order to undo multiplication, all I got to do is divide. So I want to get rid of the L and the H. So those are the two things I'm going to divide by. And this crosses the L's off, this crosses the H's off, so all that I'm left with over here is W. And that equals volume divided by length times height. So here's part A all done. And then part B asks us to find the width. So we're looking for width. We're going to use this formula of a rectangular prism that has a volume of 79.04 So we'll plug that in for V. Cubic centimeters. A length of 5.2 centimeters. And a height of 4 centimeters. So then all we have to do is type this in our calculator. We don't have to type some stuff in our calculator and then do some subtraction problems. So we're going to look for 79.04 divided by, I need some parentheses, 5.2 times 4 on the bottom. Oh, this didn't type in right. So let's try this again. 5.2 times 4. Alright, so we end up with 3.8. So that gives us a width of 3.8 centimeters. And that's it. So you should be able to solve equations for a given variable. So here's your equation, and you're asked to solve for r. And then use that to solve a real-world problem. So find the height after we've solved that. Make sure you write down any questions you have, and we can go over them in class tomorrow. Enjoy your night.